I read a story recently, and in there was a mini tale. And this tale was about a microscopic life form, a whole community, teeny tiny little life forms that were living on a world. And they were like us, where they knew things. They had intelligence. They could search and know their surroundings, and they communicated with one another. But in comparison to us, they were microscopic. One day, one of these little beings, in looking around at his world, realized that the world was actually a finger. That all of these little creatures, this civilization, was living on the tip of a finger, an index finger. And these little creatures, some of them believed this one, some of them did not, some of them didn't know what to believe. But all of these little creatures contained on their world have no idea where they are living until they kind of take a step outside of that. And when they take a step outside of that, then they're able to realize, well, this is just a part of something bigger. We're living on the tip of a finger. And to the one who discovered it, to his amazement, he realized that the finger was pointing somewhere. But from their vantage point, they couldn't know where. They couldn't know what was beyond their world until they started to dig further into it. They had no idea that they were being directed elsewhere until they found out that they were on the tip of an index finger pointing elsewhere. Once they began looking where they were, could they really know where they were going? Jesus tells his disciples parables to show them where they are and to direct them where they are going. Because here we are, living on our world. And we really could not have a grasp of our world unless we got outside of it. But we can't do that. Yes, we can take a rocket into outer space. Yes, we have been on the moon. We have sent satellites and whatnot out and further away to take pictures of planets and the solar system. We've looked into the telescope and seen as far as we can. But we're still not out of our world. We're still in our universe. But our universe is pointing us somewhere. Because this universe has been created by God. And this universe is pointing us and directing us towards Him. If you were to look at a painting that I painted, or if I built a machine, if I were Henry Ford, and I built a car, and you had never seen a car before, you would have to come to me to find out what that car was all about, how you ran it, what its purpose was. Or if you invented something that the world has not seen before, the only way to truly know that invention was to come to you and find out what it's all about. Likewise with our world. We can study our world as much as we want, but until we go beyond it, until we step outside of it, we don't know what it's for. We don't know where it's pointing us. We can know all about it, and it does us no good until we realize that it is a finger pointing us elsewhere. And that elsewhere is God. Which is why Jesus can so easily flip the story around and pull the simplest little thing, a mustard seed, a tree. Our first reading speaks of God plucking a tender shoot from a cedar tree and planting it on the highest mountain. And He uses that to demonstrate God's providence. And Jesus uses His story to demonstrate the kingdom of God to us. Well, the only reason that they can do that is because the kingdom of God is embedded in the world. That if God created this world, if He designed this world, then everything in this world points back to Him. And we can learn Him by looking at the world around us, by looking at relationships around us, by looking at creation around us. We can learn Him. And today Jesus brings to our attention the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God can be seen in a seed, and it can be seen in a great tree. What is He saying to us about the kingdom of God? But that this great tree houses all creatures. All creatures find a home there. All creatures dwell in its shade and in its branches. All creatures come together to make it their home. God's kingdom draws all of us into His home. God's kingdom draws all of us to Himself. But His kingdom is not here. His kingdom is beyond. This world, that tree, that seed, that shoot, they are all pointing us beyond. And as we gather here today, we have come here today, have we not? Because we recognize there is something more, that our lives are pointing us elsewhere, that the things that happen in our lives are drawing us elsewhere, that the people in our lives are pointing us to something else, and we're searching for that something else. It's all pointing us to God. It's all pointing us to His kingdom. We cannot be content here. We have to look for something beyond here. And we also have to recognize that everything we do here has to reflect where it is we are going. That this world does not contain God's kingdom, but God's fingerprints are all over it. And we too are His creation. And we are builders of that kingdom, little by little, because we're a part of it. And so everything we do then must also reflect what God Himself will do. When we cooperate with His plan, we are filled with grace. We are magnifying everything that God has done. As Mary herself said, "My soul proclaims and magnifies the greatness of God. What He has done, I will now do in my person, and I will make it more seen." And she magnifies God's goodness. She cannot do anything but do that. But when we fail to magnify God, when we fail to do things that imitate the kingdom, we call that sin, as we have now blurred and distorted the creation around us. And so we are called beyond ourselves. We're called outside of ourselves. We're called to the very limits of creation. The same story that I was reading described a world in its creation, and that the gods created the world perfectly flat, so that everybody who lived on it would know where the boundaries were, would know where the edges were, and could stand at the edge and look beyond. But when the race fell, the world curved in on itself and became round, so that there were no boundaries anymore. And everybody could go as far as they wanted and get nowhere. And everybody folded in on themselves, no longer coming to the boundaries to look beyond, but rather to run in circles after their own tails. It's our story. We don't want to run in circles anymore. We don't want to be caught and lost in sin anymore. We want something beyond. We have to find the boundaries. We have to go to the edge and look beyond. Where in your world do you run into a boundary? Where in your life do you hit a wall? Give thanks for those boundaries. Give thanks for those walls, because they break us out of our cycles, and they cause us to look beyond, to yearn beyond, to hope beyond, to find the God who is beyond, and the God whose fingerprints are all over our lives. The kingdom of God is not of this world, but this world is pointing us to the kingdom of God. We are destined to be there. And so that is our joy and that is our journey. And as we go through this ordinary time and this season of growth, we use this as our starting point. Let's look beyond. Let's see what we can find. Let's aim for God and recognize His fingerprints everywhere so that we can one day be in that kingdom where we will find our peace, our contentment, and our happiness. We are living on the tip of a finger, and that finger is pointing us elsewhere. Where is it pointing? That is the question. And when we answer that, then we find our happiness.